You ever wonder what it's like to talk to the leader of one of the most far-right organizations in America, someone who led an insurrection? I do. Well, our next guest, Mike Giglio, actually did that. So he's a reporter. He wrote this story in The Intercept. He's got a book called Shatter the Nations, ISIS and the War for the Caliphate. But I want to talk to him about his discussion with the leader of Oath Keepers. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. So I'm surprised by a lot of things. So they feel betrayed by Donald Trump. I want to get to that in a minute. But Mike, I can't help but ask, how'd you get the interview in the first place? I mean, this guy's massively right wing. Why did he trust you to do these series of talks with him?
So I've been talking to the leader of the Oath Keepers, Stewart Rhodes, for a couple years now. And the first time I reached out to him, I was actually doing an investigative piece for The Atlantic. So I actually started our conversations by letting him know that I had like a leaked database of his membership roles and was doing a story, and we just kind of like took it from there. So I've been talking to him on and off since like January 2020, and at this point it's like I think we just have a long running conversation based on that article.
Yeah, okay, so I happen to think he's nuts, but he went to Yale Law School, so that's kind of interesting. Like, did his dad go there, or is he actually a bright guy who lost his mind at some point?
He is a bright guy, and he is also kind of like this bootstrap story where he grew up just completely divorced from that world and didn't even start going to school until he was in his mid-20s, and he started with community college, and then went to UNLV and did really well there, and then got into Yale. But yeah, that was definitely kind of like, I think he was probably first in his family to go through all that elite university track.
So relatively bright guy, and got to a better law school than I did, and like you say, it's not legacy or anything like that. So tell us what Oath Keepers is and what they're charged with on January 6th, so we get a sense of the context before we get into who he is.
So the Oath Keepers are one of the largest, if not the largest, militant groups in the country. They've been around since 2009. They say that their mission is to protect the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and they kind of crib openly the oath that soldiers and police swear to the Constitution when they serve, and they do recruit among the police and the military communities. So they say they're nonpartisan. Yeah. In reality, especially in the Trump years, they have basically been full on in their support for Trump, and as they viewed it, whether they want to admit it or not, they thought that Trump was the first time that they really had like an ally in the White House, and so January 6th was an extension of that. Stewart Rhodes put himself forward publicly as a defender of Trump, and he was hoping that even that Trump would call up the Oath Keepers and other irregular groups like this on the militant right to help overturn the election and call a new one. That was what he wanted to happen, and so they were there on January 6th, by their own telling at least, in case the president called on them, which as I put to Rhodes, is a pretty frightening thought. And they're charged with seditious conspiracy because some of the Oath Keepers, not Rhodes himself, but a lot of his members, I think around a dozen, allegedly breached the Capitol as part of the riot, and so they're charged with conspiracy for that.
Okay, so I want to get back to their sedition in a minute, and how they feel betrayed by Trump, but I'm most curious about what is the core of their belief. Right. My guess is that if you call them racist, they would say nonsense. Obviously, they're not progressives, right? But they claim to be nonpartisan. That's interesting. So, what are they so mad about?
They have a belief system that says like the Constitution is being violated, and we are in danger of a tyrannical government in the United States. And the way that they see that government taking shape is a liberal-oriented government, right? Like their number one concern when they talk about the Constitution is Second Amendment. So they're very concerned about gun control, and Rhodes in particular, the way that he's portrayed the threat facing America, the threat, foreign and domestic, that the Constitution needs to be protected against, is like a subversive liberal order. So they're
No, I don't know. Mike,
that this is part of the. If you've listened to Trump and his allies talk in 2020 about social justice protests being, an insurgency and an attempt to undermine Trump and part of a Marxist conspiracy, against America, that's the belief system that Rhodes falls into.
So
and that's what I mean when I say subversive left, as they portray it.
So Mike, here's the thing, right? So I actually think that, and I've said this a million times on the show, we could actually get along with the right wing if they just bothered to look up for a second on at least economic issues. So is the government rigged? Yes, the government is rigged. Who rigged it? Well, just follow the money. They're the people who bought all the politicians. How'd they buy them? Through campaign donations. They give them millions of dollars and then the politicians work for them. And who has all the money? The corporations do. And they buy the politicians. It's so obvious. It's so obvious. So I'm curious if you guys had a conversation about that, and if you said maybe it's not the Marxists, maybe it's the other guys, the guys who have all the money that are giving the bribes to the scummy politicians who are rigging the system against you. Have they never considered that? I mean, so I don't get it. He goes to Yale Law School, and is he that dumb that he never thought of that?
I mean, I think if you took away like the pejorative language about it, like he does, they would agree with you on that. Like that's the same way that they portray American politics, and I do push them on that idea that, there are plenty of people on the left that would agree with the assessment that there is a corrupt elite that control American politics. It's just not exactly the way that you see it. And Trump, as the left would see it, would be a part of the problem. Can't you see that? And Rhodes himself, because he is very attuned to American politics, he would like to say that the left had it right about the 1%. He says to me all the time in interviews, and he kind of skews it, in his own version of what you just said, which is the left and the right see the same enemy. We're just not understanding who's really at the top of it.
No, but I mean, look, the reason I use it,
I think you're onto something on that, though. That is something that as you're obviously basing this on your own correct analysis and reporting. Like that is a sentiment that is shared across the right. That does echo a lot of what's shared across the left.
So that's really important. I think that eventually progressives can win elections on a mass scale because of that. But Mike, it's hard not to call them pejorative names, and I know you got to talk to them, et cetera, and I'm sure you have some professional relationship.
No, I'm just saying they would hear your message if you didn't say that. That's what I'm saying. Like he would agree with what you just said, aside from that bit about him being dumb.
Mike, I actually don't agree with that. A bunch of Democrats kiss their ass and say like, "Oh my God, we have to respect the right wing and stuff." If Stewart was here, I'd say, "Hey, dumb, what the hell does capitalism have to do with Marxism?" What?
No. I'm just saying. All I meant by that was just like obviously they wouldn't agree with you calling them that, but the rest of it, in their own words, they would agree with. Obviously, you saying it, maybe they probably find a million ways to pick bones with it.
Yeah, it's just the right wing is so frustrating. How could the biggest capitalist in the world be Marxist? Please just look into logic, look it up in the dictionary or something. Jesus Christ. Anyway, so that's why I'm so fascinated by your interview. Okay, but we got to get to how he felt betrayed by Trump. Again, how am I not going to call him a dumb? You didn't know Trump was going to betray you? Come on. So, but why does he think that he was betrayed?
What he had told me was, and which is in the article, which is in the Intercept, is that Trump, as we all know, went out publicly saying that the election had been stolen, and then gave that speech on January 6th saying, if you march down to the Capitol, I'll be there with you. And as Rhodes put it in the interview, just ghosted and didn't show up at his own party. And as Rhodes felt when I was speaking to him, these all the people that kind of took that seriously, the idea the election had been stolen, and went down to the Capitol to try and do something about it, were, as he put it again, this is just his. I'm just telling you what he told me. Is that they were left out to dry by Trump, and he mentioned Trump didn't even pardon anyone on his way out of office, didn't do anything for their legal defense. That was kind of like the way that he portrayed the betrayal by Trump.
Yeah.
The people that had showed up at the Capitol.
Yeah, of course Trump was going to do that. Trump is sitting at $200 million that he raised for legal defense. Hasn't given a penny to anyone's legal defense on January 6th. That's because, hey, Stewart, he's a con man. That's what we told you. We were right and you were wrong. So now I say that to Stewart, who's in prison. And although, is he out on bail right now? He
has been denied bail.
Okay, so he's in
prison. I would point people to a very interesting report that came out after my own by BuzzFeed, saying that Sidney Powell has reportedly, according to BuzzFeed, funded some of the defense of some January 6th defendants, including potentially Rhodes himself, which happened after he was arrested, which is after I spoke to him.
Yes, Sidney Powell did, but not Donald Trump. Of course, Donald Trump.
Exactly. Yeah.
Donald Trump wouldn't even fund Rudy Giuliani's defense. He's such a monster. So however much you think the Oath Keepers are terrible, and I think far right, militant, and potentially violent, and they carried out that violence on January 6th, so it's not potential anymore. Group is less dangerous than a monster like Donald Trump. Anyways, one more thing, and I wish we could talk about this for hours, but. And everybody check out Mike's report at The Intercept called The Lonely Revolutionary. It's really interesting. So when you point out, okay, so Trump wasn't the guy, in his vision, what happens where they win, right? And when they, like, how do they win and what do they win?
In Rhodes' vision,
yeah.
What I can tell you what the win would have been like in 2020, because he put this out there publicly and he said to me in interviews, which is Trump would have invoked the Insurrection Act, called up irregular forces, including the Oath Keepers, as a militia to help put down any resistance to this move, nationalized the National Guard, federalized the National Guard, and called an entirely new election on different terms than the one that we had. And obviously that's an extremely frightening prospect.
So Dum Dum doesn't realize that ends democracy. Like he's like, oh, I'm gonna here to protect democracy. So we're gonna protect it by ending it and having vigilante justice and military rule. He just doesn't get that.
I think it's important to understand that, Rhodes himself, the Oath Keepers represent a much larger part of the American right. And that they have convinced themselves that what they were doing on January 6th and what they continue to do, and all the efforts that are related to that is defending democracy, and that they are actually somehow defending it. Like that's the belief, and like that's what the country's up against.
Well, I mean, it's the most ironic thing in the world, but that's exactly what the American empire said as we did imperialism. You have to, destroy the village in order to save it. So I guess Stewart Rhodes thought you have to destroy democracy in order to save it. Super ironic that he would agree with the American government on that. And lastly, did you ever bring up to him, hey, Trump and your side lost 60 cases in a row, never presented one piece of evidence that the election was stolen? Does that, or it's all a conspiracy, right? It's all conspiracy. All the Trump judges, everything's a conspiracy. The only person who knows is Stewart Rhodes. That's my outsider view, but you talk to him. Is that his sense of it?
I think that like this segment of the population, that's not an argument that holds water. They have all kinds of places that they go, and mentally to say, well, the cases weren't heard fairly and all that. So and this is not anything that's surprising, but that's not an argument that works. Yeah,
I know facts are not a thing that works with these guys. To all the right wingers, look up. The guy robbing you isn't the guy with no power, it's the guy with all the power. And it's corporate executives that are giving money to politicians. It isn't some rando Marxist that has no money and no power. God, they're so frustrating. But it's a really interesting set of interviews. Again, the piece is called "The Lonely Revolutionary." Mike Giglio, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks again for having me.
No problem. Thanks for watching The Young Turks. We really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.